Hi everyone, this is Dr. Raquel Butler from Integrated Veterinary Therapeutics.
And Sophie Vandenberg from Equine Postulate. And we welcome you to the Equine Functional Posture Podcast, your ultimate source for insights into the influence of functional posture on biomechanics, health, and overall well-being of horses.
Whether you're a seasoned equestrian, an equine professional, or simply a horse enthusiast, this podcast is designed to help you understand the critical aspects of functional posture.
Tune in each week as we discuss practical tips, delve into expert interviews, and explore the latest research in the impact of functional posture on equine anatomy, physiology, movement, and more.
Let's create a world where we empower our horses to be in a mental, emotional, and physical balance. Hi everyone, welcome to this podcast. We are discussing starting young horses. How are you going, Sophie?
Hi, Raquel. Going really well. Looking forward to today. This is our second podcast with Mel Fleming as a guest. So it's a lead on from our last episode. And today we're talking about starting young horses. So it's almost a lead on from our podcast on foals as well. So excited.
Yeah, so people should go back and have a listen to that if you've got a young horse. But yeah, welcome Mel to this podcast.
Hello, thank you for having me.
So yeah, for anyone who would like to know more about Mel Fleming, we did have her on in a previous podcast, and so go back and listen to that to hear about how she started her journey with posture. But she also holds clinics in we've actually just recently changed the name of them. So it's not introduction to riding. What's the name of your courses at the moment?
Well, my first course, the introductory course to all of my courses, Soul Deep Connection and Optimal Biomechanics. It used to be called the Foundation course, Connection and Fundamental Feel, but then there's so many other courses that are actually going to be part of the foundation, so I thought I'd give it a different name.
Yeah, and then the Intro to Riding one?
Riding with Synchronicity. Introduction to Riding with Synchronicity. But,
so they're great places to start, especially if you have a young horse. But also I go back and do the clinics done them numerous times, because every time I go back there's always a deeper level of understanding with those foundations, especially, working with lots of different horses, and it's always a reminder about your connection to yourself. But a topic that's, well, it's important to me right now because I have a young horse who's still not started, who's 5 in the paddock, Ellie Mae, and recently attended the clinic with Mel where there was a number of young horses who were beginning their journey into being ridden horses. Some had already had some negative experiences. Actually, a few of them had already had negative experiences, but just how important that starting process is, and how it's traditionally been done in quite a quick manner. There's still a lot of people who do it over 6 weeks, but we are starting to kind of shift our understanding of what that means. So yeah, it's great to have Mel, and she's been involved in starting lots of horses, and to get her perspective, especially from the postural perspective. So first of all, we'd like to ask you, when we're thinking about young horses, what should we be aiming for before we even think about getting on them, before we even think about introducing a saddle or anything? What's your opinions on that?
Yeah, I think it's very important to get horses' bodies prepared where they're strong enough to carry a rider. I think historically, well, especially in America and in Australia, sort of just pull a young horse out of the paddock and, basically, saddle them up and hop on them in a few days. For a week, you should be out there mustering cattle, or people just think horses are a big, strong animal, which they are. but they think, it's no issue for a horse to carry a human. But, for a long time, I used to think that because I was brought up in that same era and way of starting horses initially. But as I evolved and started to learn more about biomechanics, and then you start seeing the long-term damage that happens to horses when they're ridden, when their bodies aren't properly developed and they're not strong enough and prepared. And then, we think back what the original history of dressage and everything was about, was just to get horses strong enough to actually be able to carry a rider. So, how my thinking's really evolved now is that before we even consider hopping on a horse, and cats coming to visit, before we even consider hopping on them, have we prepared them physically? So we want to prepare them mentally and emotionally and build their confidence, but physically, is their body strong enough? So, a horse to carry a rider has to carry itself in what I would call an engaged state, meaning that it's carrying more of its body weight back with its hind legs, and its hind legs can be supporting and carrying the weight of the rider. And then, of course, the other aspect of an engaged state is that the hind legs are actually doing more of the pushing or the forward propulsion. So when horses are just, loose running around the paddock on their own, and young horses, it's not as important for them they don't have to carry themselves in an engaged state. So if you think about a horse carrying a rider, it's like becoming a weightlifter. So, if a human was not carrying much weight, looking at my cat making me laugh.
Because your cat is sitting there just like listening very intently.
I was wondering what you were smiling at, and then I could see the cat.
She's agreeing with your conversation.
That's right. Anyway, she's meowing now. Now, where was I?
Sorry.
No, you're right. Like for a horse, carrying a rider is like being a weightlifter. So if we think about a human, if they bend down and pick up things that aren't very heavy, it's not that big a deal. They start lifting up heavier things. If they don't lift with good posture and use their body correctly, it's going to cause problems. And even if they're not lifting really heavy items, if they long-term lift incorrectly, like time after time after 10, even lightweight things are going to, down the track, create a lot of issues. So horses, when they're just out and they're about on their own, they're not having to carry that extra weight. So it doesn't matter if their posture is not perfect. A lot of domestic horses don't have very good posture in the paddocks for lots of reasons, and which we sort of went into another podcast, so I won't go over all that again now. But we can't just assume that horses are just going to be born and have the right posture. A lot of horses just even genetically, they can just be born with poor posture before anyone actually does damage. And then they've also got to then get strong enough to carry a rider. So I think it's really important, and it's going to make how the horse feels about the whole process. Like if they feel strong enough to do it and it feels more easy, there's just going to be less stress, less emotion, less resistance, because their body can physically cope with it.
Yeah, so then when you talk about that preparation in terms of, preparing their posture, do you think that that can be done in a matter of weeks, months, years? Like, in terms of developing that over time, like what's the process that people should be thinking about?
Well, every horse is an individual, and so some are going to be much more compromised than others. But I think if we were going to, like, as an average, I would say looking at 3 months is a good average. Some horses might not take quite that long. Some horses could take longer, because it depends on what accidents, injuries they might have, what their nutritional deficits might have been in the past, how much time people have got to put into it. That's also a factor. Their age. But, you know, 3 months is the ballpark figure is pretty realistic, I think, for a lot of horses.
Yeah, that's with the focus on groundwork, developing their posture, developing that ability for the back to be supported to carry somebody.
Yeah.
And teaching them how to actually use themselves. So when you're kind of getting to that point where you're starting to think, all right, like maybe they're ready to carry a weight, what are your indications that the horse is getting to that point?
I want to see that they have what I would call a neutral spine or a more level spine. Like if a horse has still got a very downhill posture, meaning like bum high or croup high, to me that horse is not really in a fit state to be ridden. I know a lot of people, especially if they're into quarter horses, are going to say, oh yeah, but quarter horses, that's normal, that's how they're bred, that's how they're meant to be. I would disagree, and I'm liking that Raquel's nodding her head here. Because, I've personally had downhill quarter horses and have worked with them and got them to be more level horses.
And we're setting them up by leaving them like that and just saying, oh,
absolutely,
well, that's the way they are. We're actually setting them up for a reduced career. Like they're loading their bodies, the way that we're going to end up loading through their backs. We're going to promote things like navicular and kissing spine and neck arthritis. And like it just really limits their longevity. So
and their physical performance, so like if people want performance horses, when horses are in that downhill posture, their pelvis is not going to be in the optimal positioning, which then is going to put stress and strain on hips, stifle, hocks, fetlocks. So that horse is, it's not going to stay sound for as long as potentially it could, but it's also never going to realize its maximum performance. Getting a horse to be like more level, and I'm not just only talking about croup to wither level, but it's like if you could just imagine the horse's torso, like, if you cut their legs off and their head off, like that rug area that's left in the middle, you call that the torso. How is that downhill or is that level? And even, the line from the top of their croup to the base of the wither, like, is that really steeply sloping downhill? So we've got a sharp V just behind the wither. Because that's such a common thing to see in horses that a lot of times people just think that's normal. But when we see that, that's a very clear sign of dysfunctional posture and a horse that's going to be really on their forehand.
Yeah.
A horse on their forehand is like trying to drive a car with 2 flat tires on the front. Steering's going to be hard. It's not going to be really easy to maneuver that car around. And that's what it's like for the horse. When you get a horse into an engaged state where they're lifted up and using their hindquarters for their weight carrying and pushing forward propulsion, it's like driving the car with power steering. And that horse is in a state of balance where they're ready to go in any direction. So the thing is that you're going to make progress a lot quicker by getting the horse's body prepared. So then the horse is actually physically able to do what you want it to do. Otherwise, we're just getting on a horse and expecting this horse with 2 flat tires and no power steering and, all the weights in the wrong places.
Hard slug.
Yeah, like it's just not going to be much fun for the horse or you, and it's actually going to be slower progress because you've then got to go and repair all of that damage that's done, and then the mental and emotional stress on the horse because everything feels hard. What if we set the horse up so the horse goes, oh, this actually feels pretty easy, this whole riding thing. I quite like this. Instead of, they think everything's hard and this is uncomfortable and my body's sore and my body hurts and I don't know if I like this. An interesting thing that horses actually go, especially if they're pressured a bit and pushed along a bit, which is what often happens and what I've done a lot in early days in the past as well. But it was interesting to me how they'd be accepting of a lot of things because they just didn't really have much time to think. And, you know, you just sort of kept progressing with everything. But as time went on, things got worse, like cantering got harder because their bodies were getting sorer. So the resistance would start showing up later. That
Feels
was
like
interesting to me.
robbing Peter to pay Paul. Like you're trying so
Yeah.
hard to get ahead in one place and you've just taken yourself 10 steps back in another.
Yeah. So it's like slow down to hurry up.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
a bit weird.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. And when you're talking about, you're just saying the canter, eventually, you know, you see more of a deterioration than an improvement. What are the quality of different gaits that you're looking for as, you know, you consider starting to ride them or as you progress while you're starting them?
Well, what I would like to see a horse could do on the ground before I ever rode it is that it could easily find its balance and walk just effortlessly on its own in a state of balance where it's not just on the forehand, it's actually supporting itself more with its hind legs. I want the horse to have a default state of like, this is where the horse is like, this is how I walk, this is who I am, this is how I move, where I don't have to be like, help correct that horse every few steps, or remember to put your balance here, remember to hold your neck here, remember to do this. I want that horse to be able to just like, yep, this is how I operate. And in the trot, I want it to feel solid as well, where the horse knows this is my tempo. Because one of the important things that a lot of people don't really understand, I think, is that, let's say we'll use the trot as an example. There's one specific tempo where a horse can truly find its balance at. Okay. So if the trot's too fast, the horse will be holding some tension. If the trot's too slow, it's going to feel labored. When the trot's just right, so the right tempo, which means the right speed, that's where a horse can find balance at. So one of the things I want is my horse goes, this is my default tempo. The horse just, you know, you put that horse out on a lunge or something like that. And not that it's all about lunging, because horses can get bored with lunging. But let's say we put the horse out on the lunge, the horse just goes, yep, this is my tempo. I've got a rhythm. This is how I carry myself. So it's like the horse is owning that. If that horse is still in a state of, oh, I'm slowing down, oh, I'm speeding up, oh, I've lost my balance here, oh, I can't bend this way, we're just like more than doubling the challenge when we put a rider on top and a saddle. So I want my horse to be able to just walk and trot. I want them to be able to be canter because I want to test the canter with the saddle and that in their emotions, you know, they can handle and manage their emotions in a canter when the energy's up. But I don't necessarily always expect that the horse has the perfect balance in the canter before I ride. I mean, it would be ideal if it did, but sometimes it's not. I don't think it's that imperative.
Yeah, for that to develop.
Yeah. So in the battle, we just get the trot, and then the canter is just gonna come. So yeah, I want the walk and trot to be just easy and effortless for the horses. Like they just know this is my tempo, this is my balance. So yeah, that's when I would think, oh, well, this horse could probably cope with a rider. Because of course, what's going to happen as soon as we put a rider on, that balance is going to be compromised because, you know, and then we sit that heavy weight on their back and the horse is going, oh, geez, I thought, you know. So then they have to learn to recalibrate and balance again. But, you know, it's much easier if they already had a good state of balance before we put that weight of a rider and saddle on there.
Yeah, and like I look at Ellie and, you know, I've done a fair bit of groundwork with her. But I'm always looking at her back and going, you know, the quality of her gaits and the way that she goes into them and her facial expressions and her ability to stay relaxed and all of that. But one thing that stands out for me with her in particular is that when she's got stuff going on in her body, so she's had a number of injuries, and she's 5, but her back braces and it goes downwards. So instead of her being able to kind of lift it up and her back looking supported, and then like you mentioned a lot in the other podcast, you know, the hind limbs coming underneath and starting to push, like she's injured herself again at the moment. And so last night, like her back was going down, her pelvis was disengaged, the hind legs were out the back, and she was also a bit lame. But, you know, that is not a back that I would want to hop because she can't even support herself in that posture. And so I think it's important that people really learn how to recognize like a healthy supported back in motion compared, and to me it's like an upward swinging back, like it comes back to what we talked about in the last podcast, like the smooth rhythm and flow that's going through the body and the back, but not a back that looks like you can see the muscles bracing and tightening and it's dipping down, and the hind legs kind of just look like they're kind of popping up a little bit. And they're unable, like what I also noticed when she gets into that place is she loses what you're talking about there with the tempo. So like she'll have a bit where she can hold it, but then when she has to turn, she loses it, and then she goes quicker, and then the quality of the shape changes. Like if she's on a circle or the square, it changes. So like, from a biomechanics perspective, I'm like, well, I'm not going to get on her till she can at least, very least show me that, let alone all the other. So I think that's so important. So then that brings us to the big discussion of age, because it's a pretty it's a big talked about thing, and a lot of people are very set in their mind about like horses should be started at this age, or, you know, 2, or some people will be like 6, or, you know, they shouldn't have anything done till they're 4, or, you know, like there's a big thing about age. So your take on age, and then I'll come in with the biomechanics or the anatomy stuff. But
my thoughts are I wouldn't really want to be riding a horse much before 4 years old. I think there's a lot we can do in preparation before then, as in, you know, taking them out and about, confidence building, exposing them to things, doing postural work. You know, I think you could sit on a horse earlier than that, but sitting on a horse bareback, you know, for a couple of minutes and maybe it takes a few steps is very different than riding in trot and canter and, you know, being on that horse for 20, 30, 40 minutes, an hour or whatever. I think getting the horse used to lots of things like the saddle pad, the saddle, I think all of that is really good. But I personally wouldn't want to do riding as such, and, you know, wouldn't even want to walk around for very much at all until that horse is, more. So you're going to talk about the closing of the joints. But yeah, just until the horse is strong enough. Yeah.
And I mean, I think the strength is the foundational thing. Like even if your horse is older, if they still lacking postural strength at the age, that doesn't matter. And like, well, there's one thing I'd like to add from Ellie is, apart from the physical aspect, which is why she's still unstarted at 5, but also the emotional aspect, you know, like she just, I didn't feel like she was in a place where emotionally she could handle much more. And whether that's my inexperience, you know, handling young horses, whether it's her, you know, her demeanor as a young mare, or whatever it is, it doesn't really matter. It's more like that emotional, they've got to be ready emotionally and physically, because you see some horses that are physically doing really well, but emotionally they're still like quite anxious, like challenged by any change, maybe biting the lead rope, chewing, you know, showing some sort of stress behaviors, and to set them up also for emotional, mental longevity. Like we want them to find a place where they're relaxed with the whole process, which, you just talked about in terms of exposure and all of that. From a growth perspective, so recently I saw a skeleton that was 8 years old, and the spine, the growth plates in the spine were still open.
Right.
So he was, I think, an 8-year-old warm blood. So I don't think, he was a tall warm blood, but I don't think he was excessively tall from what they said. But he did have already arthritis in his lumbar, and they'd had issues with him picking up his back legs and things. So the growth plates in the spine, yeah, they can take a long time to close, sometimes up until, well, obviously 8. The base of the neck is the last to close, the vertebrae in the base of the neck. And the spine is generally later to close than other areas, like the carpus, the knees are around 2, 2.5. The hocks are quite late, around 4. But really what sets them up for optimal loading is that posture. But there's also stuff that we can't avoid. Like I've talked about this horse before, but so she was less than 2, sudden acute roaching of her back, and could not touch her stifles. And she'd been chased around the paddock by another horse, and in that moment, like, her growth plates had copped a huge amount of torsion and twisting, and that was enough, 5-10 minutes of that was enough to change her growth plates. So I guess that can also correlate over to, inappropriate loading and riding. But we want to make sure that back is really well supported. So if it is continuing to grow, which most likely it will be, it's growing in the best supported way that it can. So we're not already setting up for abnormal forces going through those vertebrae. And we're supporting that. And, I talked a little bit before about bone responding to loading. So, I think we do, like, sitting on them is useful, and I think the nervous system as well as the bones kind of start to recognize that ability to take load. So we need to think about it and the ligaments as well.
The abdominal muscles.
And the abdominal muscles and the posture. Like, they all need to recognize what it feels like to take load. But like you said, Mel, in terms of doing it in really short bursts, like, keeping it initially to 5 minutes with, just really simple stuff. So the whole system's getting used to it, but you're not allowing it to get to fatigue. So because a lot of the times when I see horses after they've been started, I ask them what saddle was used. And a lot of the time they say, oh, like the breaker's saddle, like whatever they use. So what's your opinion, on that first saddle that the horse is exposed to?
I think the first saddle that a horse is actually ridden in, like, would ideally be the best fitting saddle and not even a big heavy saddle that a horse could have, because that's painting the picture for that whole horse's rest of their life, like emotionally and mentally as well as physically. But yeah, like, what often happens is, this whatever saddle that the breaker has, and it's usually a very big heavy Western saddle, or those wade tree saddles, which like are so heavy, it's hard to even lift one of those on a horse. And a lot of times that's done because they want to ride in saddles that you don't get bucked off too easily or come out of too easily. But if you start horses slowly, the last few horses that I've started over the years, I've just started them all in my dressage balance saddle, because you know, I just went slow enough that I didn't feel like I'm going to need a saddle to hold me in if the horse goes to bucking or whatever, because, you know, I just took a lot more time and wasn't pushing that horse through thresholds that were going to make it likely to buck, you know. So I just, yeah, just wanted them to have the best possible first rides that they could have.
Well, and they say from a neurological perspective, you know, their first experience of anything is one that is pretty neurologically ingrained. You know, it kind
Yeah.
of sets up that neural pathway development. The first experience is one of the most important experiences
Yeah.
in terms of that pathway
Yeah.
development. So that
Yeah.
kind of makes it even more important.
Yeah, you know, especially as you're talking about that, you know, I'm just picturing in my mind, you know, little 2-year-olds with like mass, you know, they're so weak and not, you know, underdeveloped, and, you know, big heavy saddles on, and they're so on their forehand, and they just must be like trying to walk around just like with all this weight, like, you know, and that's their first experiences, you know,
And they're emotionally, like they're so emotionally underdeveloped as well to be able to deal with that. So
well, I think that's one of the reasons people like starting that young too, because emotionally they feel so
Vulnerable.
vulnerable
Like,
and got no defenses, like no, they're like all their power's taken away. They don't feel strong enough in their mind or their emotions to really stand up. Yeah, some of them might, but in general, most of them, like, it's like, you know, an adult might bully, or, you know, like a little kid, but when that kid grows up to be 18 years old, he's going to stand up for himself, and, you know, so when
it's
those
easy to
horses,
abuse the power that you
that's
have.
right. So when those little 2-year-olds, you know, like they just feel like they've got not much choice, not much strength to fight back mentally, emotionally, or physically. So I think it's a big reason why people like, I mean, there's also money to do with futurities and racing and all that stuff. But
yeah,
I think even when that's not part of the picture, you know, I remember the old school, you know, how my great auntie and uncle, they were always like, they were starting horses at 18 months old and 2 year, you know, before they're even 2, and riding them a lot because it's like, oh, they're easy, you know, there's just, you know, don't wait till they get too old. They're too hard to break in then.
and also it does seem that a lot of still it's different now, but in a lot of spaces they're still not doing very much before that stage.
Yeah.
And at that point you start to realize, okay, I want to geld them, perhaps I want to brand, microchip, we should start trimming their feet, and the horse actually hasn't had a lot of preparation up until that point, and people say, well, we'll just break them in because it's there's so much that you can do with them before you break them in, but it's seen like the be all and end all, you know, like the horse goes out, it's born, it grows up, and then you break it in, rather than doing all the foundational work before that point. You know, it doesn't feel like you should have taught them how to lead softly off a feel, or have prepared them emotionally and physically for having the balance to stand and have their feet trimmed. All of that gets handed to a breaker and it's outsourced to somewhere else. And so that's, you know, it becomes a big event, like the starting of the horse, but it should be an extension of teaching them how to be touched for the first time, or how to be interested in, you know, seeking out something interesting like a flag, you know, when you're asking them to be curious. You can have that same experience starting them under saddle. In that, how do you like to consider the concept, and what are some important things you really look for setting them up for that first ride?
Well, apart from all the posture work, like there's just a lot of confidence building stuff, like with flag, with tarps. But again, it's how we do that, because a lot of times people do that stuff and they just do it like flooding the horse, and the horse just gets overwhelmed, and often they become introverted or get into a bit of a freeze state, and they're just tolerating that stuff. But so it's like, you know, introducing that stuff slowly and in a way that really builds confidence and curiosity, as opposed to just like they go into a freeze and they're tolerating things. then I would do first rides bareback without any saddle, and usually only just walking around. But I think that just gets them used to the feel of the rider, and it's also safer because it's easier to get off if something did go wrong, and you're not going to get hung up in a stirrup. So that's just something that I've sort of, found to be helpful.
Just carrying on from the topic in the last podcast, how do you want that horse to feel during that process? How do you want them to experience those first times that you're either sitting on them or preparing for it?
Well, I want them to feel good about it, as in, I want that horse to want me to hop on. I don't want to hop on a horse that doesn't want someone to hop on it because, if a real horse really doesn't want you there, they can be pretty good at getting you off if they want to or they feel they need to. So, just slowly getting them used to having your weight, having you standing above them. Because even like some people might not even realize that for some horses, just seeing someone out of the back of their eye instead of looking at from the front of their eye and then seeing them above is a big deal for horses. And doing things like, making sure that horse is happy for you to touch it everywhere, all over their body, and touching it with all of my weight. So how can we simulate riding? Like I'll do things like walk along and have my rib cage pressing against the horse's rib cage and giving it a hug around its hind leg and rubbing it with my boots all down its front legs and under its belly. I want it to feel good about when my body touches their body, it feels good to them. They like that, feels safe, it feels reassuring. So lots of preparation like that.
Yeah. And I mean, you're just talking about, again, referring to the last podcast, how deeply your posture and your intention in your own body affects them and their body. And thinking about posture, how do you promote that mind-body connection and to the ground for a young horse so that, they feel centered and they feel safe, like nothing's getting out of their control? Would you have a specific exercise even that you would, with a young horse, you'd be like, okay, we're going to make sure that we can do this before, that you really feel into your feet?
I think I think there's a lot of answers to that question. When I do a lot of like bringing my awareness, some of the things I do are the postural stuff. So a lot of horses don't have much awareness or connection to their back end. So I would do an exercise. This is also a great way of connecting to your horses. It's actually one of the ways I really started to experience a very deep level of connection with the horse. Walking next to them and imagining that I am their skeleton and that I am their bones inside their hind legs and I am the one doing the walking. That actually takes you to a very deep level of connection and awareness. But what it also does is when you put your awareness into their body and into their hind legs or their feet, it takes their awareness there too. So that's going to help a lot with proprioception, body awareness, body control. It's kind of like the whole Feldenkrais concept is like, Feldenkrais is awareness through movement. It's like bringing awareness to the body, and then the body wants to find the best possible way to move and rebalance and recalibrate itself. So just all of that is going to help them, feel into their feet, feel connected with you, feel that you're part of them, like you're part of each other even before you hop on. Builds a lot of like mental connection. And just remembering at the last clinic that Raquel did, and she had this amazing experience with Ellie trotting on the circle on the lunge at the end, and where there was this totally like this mental connection and this energetic level of connection where Ellie was just holding herself in this really amazing state of balance in the trot, where she just found the tempo, she found the rhythm, and you could just see this energetic and mental connection that they both had with each other. And, it's pretty magical well, when you experience it, it's magical to see it. And even though I experience that nearly all the time with the horses that I work with, even when I see someone have that experience, like, it's just amazing to see it. But that mental energetic connection like that, it's already setting the horses up to feel like you're part of them, and that feels so good to them. Like, that's the feeling of unity, like, you know, Tom Dorrance talks about true unity. That synchronicity is like you're already together as one being. So once they've sort of started to have those experiences with you, and then, you know, when the first rides that I do, I'm looking for that, even bareback, I'm looking for that quality of connectedness and like feeling every moment of every stride, and how good does the quality feel? How are they bending their ribs? It's like, how good can that whole experience feel? It's like, and if we've really got this soft and smooth rhythm and flow in like exercises like bending their ribs and hindquarter yields and forehand yields, and it's all soft and fluid, as opposed to, you know, we're just, you know, he just yielding his hindquarters, he stiffly and rigidly like shuffles over there and shuffles over here. But it's like you're taking that whole fluid, good flow that feels good together into exactly the same when you hop it on. And so you've already created that feeling between you and the horse.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
valuable. No, just that exercise you were talking about, walking beside the horse and imagining yourself as a skeleton. It makes being able to, like, for somebody listening who maybe hasn't had that experience, or, you know, the concept is new to them, to understand that there are tangible steps in between the position you're in now and getting to that stage makes things feel achievable as well.
Yeah.
Like, it's not intrinsic to you that you can have that you can achieve that
Absolutely.
feeling. You know, anybody can come and learn skills and have you know, the intention to get there, knowing that there are tangible steps in between, you know, to get to that point. In saying that, how do you view their role? You know, the owner, obviously you outsource a lot of your training, and we're talking about starting young horses. Most people don't start their own horses, but the horses spending the majority of their life and their ridden career with their owner, who and they do have deep relationships. Even, you know, just horses who don't have fantastic posture, they still have deep relationships and connections with people. How do you see owner's role in the beginning of a young horse's development and setting them up and thinking about how they're going to get them to a sound postural ridden stage?
Yeah. Well, I think the owner has a very, very important role. I personally would like to see people doing as much of the process as possible themselves, because it's a lot of pressure on even trainers sending horses to trainers, you know, because there's time pressures, because
Money
people,
pressures.
yeah, money, that's right, because, you know, people can't afford just to have this, you know, never ending like bank account, like, to pay for their horse to get started. And they don't realize how much time might be involved in preparing a horse posturally if you're going to do that. And then if the horse, you know, they're like people, you know, they're all different. Like, you know, you put a heap of kids in kindergarten together, they're not all going to progress at exactly the same rate. So the horses are like that. They're not all going to take exactly, you know, X amount of weeks to get to a certain stage. So, you know, people have a bit of an expectation that, you know, we send our horse to a trainer for 6 or 8 weeks and he should be able to come back, like, walk, trot, canter, balance, and go out in a trail ride and be really confident. But it's, if you're really trying to do the right thing by the horse and get the horse's body really prepared. I mean, we already said it might take 3 months just of groundwork to really prepare a horse's body. And then if you got a horse that's a bit, you know, trickier mentally and emotionally, or you got one that's already had some bad experience, like once you've had a horse that's had some trauma, had some negative experiences riding, that's a lot harder to, because now you've got to undo and rebuild all that horse's confidence again. So yeah, it becomes a lot of pressure for trainers. It's a kind of a hard job for trainers because there's a lot of pressure, and then they end up putting that pressure on the horses, even if they don't always want to, because there's a timeline and there's a big expectation. And when people don't see the process, they don't know how long, like how horses might struggle with certain things. Like some horses just might have a much harder time accepting the feel of a saddle or the girth. And if horses have got postural issues or soreness or injuries in their bodies, like as you guys know, both body workers, that's going to really slow the progress down, because you might get a horse that just can't accept the back cinch, or they can't accept this, or they just can't cope with certain things because they've got pain and discomfort in their body. I know that's getting off track a bit from your question, but it also is pointing out to me how much like people need to be involved to understand that's what horses go through. And like if people saw more of that, they'd realize, oh, well, now I can see why it would take you this long. Yeah, this horse just doesn't want to accept a rider at this point, or is having a lot of trouble still accepting a saddle. So I think, I personally would like people to do as much as they can themselves, because they're also developing their own relationship and connection with that horse, because, the horse has also got to then learn how to cope with people's inadequacies. And, they just send the horse to a trainer, and the trainer does everything in a certain way. The trainer might have really good balance or really good feel or whatever. And then the horse has then got to go back and cope with someone who hasn't got that quite level of feel. It's kind of setting things up for a lot of success. I think they also need a lot of coaching and support probably in that process, so they don't get things too wrong, or don't start creating brace and they don't even know. That's the trap, that people don't even realize that their horse has still got brace, and they're reinforcing that brace or that tension, or the horse is pushing through pressure, or so I think they need some coaching with that, because people can think, oh yeah, the horse is way further along than it is, just because of their lack of experience. But I think they need to have a massive role, and the other thing is getting their riding skills up good enough too, so that when they either get that horse home, or then, like I said, they can do as much as they can in the process themselves. Because what people also don't realize is that, if you get, your old, horse who's been around, done lots of stuff, they're used to putting up with or coping when people lose their balance or their feel's not quite right. As young horses, they could get scared and lose confidence with that pretty easy, and especially if we're not trying to just shut horses down in the process. Okay, if we're just putting lots of pressure and basically shutting horses down, which means just basically causing them to tolerate whatever happens to them and not let them have a voice or an opinion, the thing that if we're not using that sort of way of working with horses, and we want horses to have a voice and express how they feel, and they're not going to put up with quite as much like when people don't have good balance or feel. So I think people really trying to get their skills up themselves on the horses that they're already riding is another big factor.
Having to carry the skills forward, meet the level that the horse has, and then continue. Yeah,
absolutely. So I think it's a big responsibility on owners to do a lot themselves and really develop their skills,
and have a relationship with the trainer as well, to learn exactly what cues did you try to install, or not install, but teach my horse that I need to apply in the same place and release at the same time that you do, to reinforce what you've taught, or to at least match, so that my horse's predictions when I go to ride it aren't that they're about to experience something completely unpredictable, because who knows what releases or not releases or lack of reward they're going to get for doing exactly what they've just been taught to do.
Yeah. I mean, I've seen a lot of horses who've been sent away to breakers and unfortunately been broken in the process, and sometimes it's really irreversible, especially if they've had a bad pullback incident or something like has happened traumatically at the breakers, let alone just the whole process. And I've seen people go through, you know, trying to rectify that where it's taken them a lot longer than 6 weeks to rectify. Like, you know, we both know of people who it's taken years for them to rectify that situation and regain the horse's trust and also repair them physically as well.
Yeah.
So one thing I would like to say, you know, if you are sending your horse away to get started and, you know, you've done all the preparations, well, there's a couple of things I'd like to say just because I've seen so many breakages. But one thing is that we need to consider it's a very stressful process, even if it isn't, you know, even if you're sending to someone, maybe you've taken your horse there a few times, that'd be great. You know, you've had lessons with the trainer, that'd be even greater. And you know, it's now the process of them perhaps getting on the horse, but the horse has had that some exposure, that'd be fabulous. But you know, when you leave your horse somewhere and that just that environmental change, let alone everything else that's going to happen to them in the process, it sets up for stress, regardless of even how well it's done. There's still a stress. And one of the things that can result from stress is gastric ulcers. So we've done a podcast on that relationship to posture, but you know, I would make sure that your horse is on some sort of gut, you know, supplement program, even, you know, going down the road of putting them on omeprazole just for that short period of time. But I would just really make sure that gut is being looked after in that process, because often they'll have a change in diet. They'll might have, you know, their whole everything changes. Like the diet changes, the hay changes, the person changes, the environment changes. Maybe they've been put in with other horses, maybe they're locked up in a yard, maybe they don't get fed that often. Some trainers, you know, hopefully you don't have a trainer like this, but they'll withhold food and water, or you know, I've seen horses come back in really poor condition. So always treat your young horse as if it has ulcers or as if it's going to get ulcers, so that you can kind of keep that as a cause of behavioral and body pain out of the equation. That's probably a big one. And the other one is, like what Mel said, is having a support person, because, you know, I know I've called you a few times when I've had an issue with Ellie, and I'm like, I remember when she was rearing and I called you and I'm like, okay, I've got this problem. I probably created it, but you know, what do I do now? Like, because you know, I didn't want to make it worse. So, you know, I took responsibility, but I also recognized that I was beyond my, you know, scope at that point, and that I was going to set up for something worse. And so, you know, we had a conversation. You told me how to manage that, and like she didn't rear again for a long time. You know, like the next rearing thing was about 2 years later, kind of thing. So, you know, just having the support person that you trust, and being involved with that process. And I know other people who are also going through the process where, you know, they have the trainer come to their place every fortnight and they're working with the trainer in that way. Like, I think that's, if you have that opportunity, that's fabulous. Or otherwise having people online, like we have Pivo and all sorts of things that you can video and get people to help you. Like, the more responsibility that we can take, the better. And that comes in knowing our limitations as well, which can be challenging. So, I think we should probably finish it up there. We've got a fair few important takeaway messages. Sophie, do you want to go through a few of those?
Well, yeah, we've masked a fair few points, really, going over a few different facets of the topic. One of the key ones being that emotionally and physically you're working to prepare and develop the horse to be posturally have postural integrity before we start riding them, because there's a total difference between a horse who is undeveloped to a horse who is developed without a rider and a horse who is developed and can carry a rider comfortably and with good soundness and good biomechanics. And in order to get to that process, treating the horse like an individual is really important. So I know, Mel, you were saying that on average, you would expect a horse to take at least 3 months to prepare, bring them along like their balance, posturally, making sure that you nut out any things that are limitations so that they're not going to fall apart when you get down the track, such as going too fast through the process. And then all of a sudden, you were saying, you find horses that have their canter deteriorating or something like that because they don't have the tempo established. So you were saying that balance point for them.
Yeah, they'd just be, the first canters they might go along all right, and then then they start just getting where they don't really want to canter anymore, or they get impulsive and start rushing. So things just,
escalate and fall out of control because there wasn't established. Awesome point about the fact that each horse has a default tempo. So for them to be able to understand and have a connection to their own tempo and find it as a balance point coming into a gait before you're going to really start them on a saddle being really important, especially the walk and the trot, and making sure that the two very important indicators that the horse is not super downhill and they don't have a steep angle at the base of their wither. Two really good indicators that a horse is able to engage their abdominals and lift their back and have motion and mobility and integrity in their thoracic sling before you add a person. And that the saddle should be the best fitting saddle that they have for their first ride in a dream world, because that deep emotional imprint is so valuable in asking them to lean into the experience of riding, of being ridden, being a ridden horse. Are all really important points.
Yeah, and thinking about the age at which they're starting them, but that doesn't mean that we just leave them until they're 4 to do anything, that, we're preparing them before that age, but we just ensure that they're not being ridden, what would we call it, normally before they're 4, like if they have a little rides like 5 minutes, and it's just more a getting them used to it as opposed to physically riding them. Thinking about doing those first few rides bareback, and us as owners taking that responsibility to do as much as we possibly can, including things like, the horse being able to be touched all over while they're still and while they're moving. And, that's something that, in the clinic with Mel, like, we had that beautiful moment of trotting with Ellie where, like, she was so connected, and it really has changed our relationship since then. It's changed her connection, and I can just really think things, and she's, even if she goes, like, her energy gets up. So like the other night, Mooney was running around the paddock, galloping in the same paddock we were working. He galloped straight past us, and she kind of tail in the air, and I just breathed and connected, and she just came straight back down next to me. So I don't have to do anything physically to her because she's really connected to her own body, but she's also connected to me. And so we've now felt that together, which is pretty cool, before you get on them to, start thinking, because I know a lot of, like, even for Jelly, it took him a long time for us to like establish that sort of connection. So to start to establish that with a young horse where they're really connecting to their body and to you is so important. Also gives me now more responsibility because she is very aware of what's possible. but that was what I was saying. So the touching all over thing, that's a limitation still with Ellie. So, and, Mel and I talked about it at the clinic, like I can't touch her in certain places. She's very communicative and she knows that she has a voice. And she is very clear to me when she's uncomfortable, and that can be difficult with young horses because you're like, is this a training issue? Are they just like playing me, or is it is there something else? And for me, I'm lucky because I have the body awareness, so I can go, okay, like she's actually lame and I can see a physical problem. But if I didn't have that, I would just be like, why is she being so bitchy? Why is she being so difficult with this? Oh, I need to like get on top of this behavior. It's bad behavior. So, it's hard for people when they don't have that knowledge of physical issues because everyone thinks it's a behavioral problem, but just be aware that young horses have had injuries. Often they muck around the paddock and do things, and I can tell you a number of injuries that Ellie's had that, yeah, if I didn't know, I just think she was being a bit of a cow, to be honest. So be really aware of that, take responsibility, and yeah, just be, really aware of your own skills, and developing them. That's an important thing of having a horse, to be able to ride and learn from like in the process of starting a young horse, because if you're not balanced, and you're a heavier rider that's also not balanced, like it's really hard for them. So our awareness of our balance and skills and postural stability and strength is super important. So it's a very big topic. It's a very important topic. And we didn't do this on the last podcast because we were going to put it in the comments. But Mel, if people want to find you, can you just say it, like where your website is and your Facebook page, and a little bit about like that you run clinics in different states and things, because we didn't say that in the last one.
Yeah, my website's just melfleming.com. Facebook, Mel Fleming Horsemanship, I think. I can't even remember. I've been connecting with horses maybe on Facebook.
And it's
but anyway, you can go to my website, you'll be able to find Facebook links.
And it's Fleming with one M, just so that people...
Fleming with one M, yeah. Yeah, and I teach clinics all around Australia pretty much. I used to teach a lot overseas, but now I'm trying to stay more in Australia. Yeah, then to do online coaching and setting up some online courses. But yep, lots of clinics all around.
And my understanding is you also have a retreat at home, don't you? That's a deep immersive experience for people who'd like to connect over a longer term with deeper support.
Yeah, I do a 6-week course. Yeah, just when people do longer stints of time, it's just amazing how much people can change. When I was in America, I used to do 10-week clinics. That's courses. That's where I got the idea from, and the changes in people and horses in that time was phenomenal. So yeah, the 6-week clinic, or I often do extended clinics like at Banyanda near Howlong, like a 2-week clinic, or things like that. So it's just incredible, like when people can do an extended period of time, how much change is possible. But yeah, other than that, there's most of the other clinics are like 3 days.
Yeah, and there's like we talked about the foundational clinics, and also there's Liberty clinics, and yeah, it's always something like I said, I've been going for years, but I still gain something every time that I go. It takes me to a deeper level with my horses and the horses that I treat. So super grateful to Mel for that.
Me too. The trickle down from Raquel. It's been great.
That's cool. Oh, thank you very much.
Awesome. Well, yeah, thanks Mel for joining us. And yeah, thanks everyone for joining myself, Dr. Raquel Butler and Sophie Vanderberg in today's podcast. Enjoy your horse time. Please keep an eye out for the next equine functional posture course. It's also a great foundation for starting young horses. And subscribe to this podcast so that you don't miss our weekly episodes. We'd also love if you left us a rating if you enjoyed today's podcast. Find the links to our socials and the courses in the comments.
And we'll see you in the next exciting episode.